Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our council meeting for the 8th of June 2022. And could I ask Councillor Kete, please, to start us off in the appropriate manner. Thank you, Robert.
Tēnā koutou, tēnei te mihi aroha kia koutou, kei raro te korowai aroha te tātou ariki, ki te tātou kaitiaki o te rohe nei, tēnā koutou, councillors, tēnā koe te tātou rangatira, Bernie, kei te mihi atu ki a hoi. Ki ino tātou. E te atua e kaharawa, kei te whakamone te mātou ki a koe e tēnei rā. Nau mai haro mai, kai wangani o tātou, ki te whakanui te tātou wairua, te hinengaro, te tīnana o tātou, uhia mai te korowai o tātou, ki te wānangananga, ki te kōrero-rero, e pāne ki te take heimu i a tātou. Nei rā, e te atua, te mihi atu ki a koe, tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Āmene. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Robert. Thank you. We have no apologies today. Thank you, full team. And before we get into the rest of the agenda, I thought it was an opportune time to welcome Araha and Ricky to the table, who are going to tell us all about Margarita Celebrations and what's planned. Welcome.
Tēnā tātou katoa, e te whānau, ngā mema o te kaunihira, ko te koromatua o Bernie. We have partnered with Moepoko and Raukawa to come up with a Matariki program, come up with a 2-week Matariki program, jam-packed full of activities. So we are going to have to just give you a brief overview of it, just because there are so many, we don't want to take up too much of your time. So we've got some information there on the screen, so that just says there that we have a 2-week program from 24th of June to 10 July. And
Kopoi, on the 16th, Tuesday the 16th, over in Foxton out at the beach, we'll be doing a karakia over there at around 5:30 a.m. In the morning with the Kazia Hemi Te Peti is going to be running that. And so you're more than welcome to come over there, and it's just acknowledging Matariki in terms of how Ngāti Raukawa acknowledge Matariki and all of Tawhitu, all of the stars. Kawai.
And again, we're going to be doing the same thing with Moepoko here in Levin, in Taitoko, and it's going to be down at Punahau or Lake Horowhenua. The same thing, welcoming in Matariki. This here is our big event that we're having over in Foxton. It's the Puranga Night Lights over Foxton. So there's going to be a range of entertainment and food trucks, and yeah, just a whole heap of fun. And it's on 25th of June.
Sunday the 26th, we've got the Punakoko, so we've got a midwinter swim out at the swing bridge. I think it's called Pogues Road, I'm not sure, but it's Lycos, it's always been a swing bridge. And that's happening at 7 in the morning, so we'll go out there and we'll do a karakia. We'll mihi to Waiti, which is the star that associates with freshwater food sources. And then after that, it's going to be hot chocolate and sausage and brie.
Matariki Day Out, so this is a day that's catered to the older people in the district. It's going to start here at Te Takiritanga o Kurahaupo, where they'll be welcomed by Moepoko, morning tea and a presentation on the screen of some sort. Then they'll go on buses to the Memorial Hall in Shannon, where they'll be entertained by the school Kapahaka group, and they will receive a kōrero about the Shannon, about the Shannon Black Smell by Ngāti Whakatere.
For the tamariki, they've got a number of programs available for our young ones, and they were going to be happening at Te Horowhenua Te Takiritanga Kura Haupō and over in the Shannon Library. They're run by Pam and the team, and they've got lots of activities, colouring and stuff, and they're making lots of lanterns and heaps of other activities available for our tamariki.
Yeah, face painting. There's also puppet shows that are going to be shown in the 3 different towns as well. And another Matariki for Littlies program that will be led by Punahou. The Kapahaka and Community Kai Night, so that's an annual event that we hold here in Te Takiritanga o Kurahaupō. There's going to be a range of Kapahaka groups, local groups, performing and entertaining. Everyone's welcome to come, and afterwards there'll be Community Kai held with choice of hangi, pumpkin soup or seafood chowder.
And Matariki ki o Tauru, over in Shannon with the whānau over there, they'll be getting in Te Māori Park, getting the lights up in the trees, and down at Te Whare Taiao, they're going to have some displays and some kōrero in there around Matariki, and then they have heaps of other activities, talent quest, and lots of kai, and the same down with the whānau over in Shannon.
And this is Levin's event, which is the Taitoko Matariki Night Market. So there's going to be lots of community kai stalls and craft stalls. There'll be a Matariki Oki singing competition. It'll be MC, so there'll be entertainment all night long, and that's going to be held in the mall car park. And
we will hopefully having the pleasure of Professor Rangi Matamua in attendance as well, because his whānau, auntie and uncle and the cousins, they're going to have set up a tent there with their merchandise, and hopefully Rangi can get back from in the cargo to make it to our event on that Friday evening.
So on the takutai, so this is a challenge put up by the Living Aquatics Centre, and people can sign up virtually online and convert aqua classes, aqua jogging classes, 2 kilometres, and the distance, if I remember correctly, 35 k's from Waikawa Beach up to Foxton Beach. So that's the distance that they'll be looking at, and progress will be kept on the screen at the aquatics. And if you swim in Ricky's event, which is the Punakoko, 7 o'clock in the morning at the river, that will be converted into k's, and it will go towards your timing here, if that helps. So so that's the majority of what we've got. We've also got some harakeke workshops. There's rongoa.
For Kaido, Jared over in the youth space is doing a program with the 3 colleges, Waipihu, Horowhenua and Manawatu, and they're going to be doing 9 carvings to represent the 9 stars of Matariki. And the good thing about it, the children from each of the colleges, they have their own time slots with Jared, and they get to draw their story, what their understanding of Matariki is, onto these different onto the 3 different and they will be displayed in the youth centre over at Te Takiritanga Kura Haupō when they're finished. And then after that, I think Jared's going to sort of for them to be displayed around at the 3 colleges.
Yeah, so I think that was the last slide. So we've also got rongoa displays, harakeke workshops, and movie nights, and maybe a few other things. There's a booklet that's just going for print at the moment, so once it's done, it's going to be shared with the community. And advertising's out at the moment as well.
Yeah, and we're lucky enough to have the, if you've got kids or grandkids who've watched Astro Kid before, the whānau down in Otaki, Māori Lands, they've got the rights to, they've converted it into Te Reo Māori Astro Kid, and so we've made a deal and a swap with the cousins down there with Libby, and so we can show them here, show Astro Kid and Te Reo Māori in the Horowhenua now here in our home.
Thank you. Really great to see that we're embracing the first real celebration, I suppose. Just because everyone's got a day off doesn't mean to say that we can't make the most of it. So look, thank you for all that work in that. And I would assume that councillors will receive a copy of the booklet when it's done so that they can participate in those things. I'll tell you one event I won't be at, and that's the swim in the river, though. No, might be some ghost apparitions that people might think are appearing at that hour of the morning. Thanks, Ricky. Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. Cheers. Okay, so we have two members of the public who wish to present to us today, and could I first of all invite Catherine forward to talk about 8.7, which is the review of the smoke-free and vape-free environment policy. Welcome, Catherine. Just turn your button on the right-hand one, thanks, Catherine. That's it.
My right hand, not yours.
Yeah.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, ko tainui te waka, ko tararua te maunga, ko ohau te awa, no Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga me Ngāti Tūkore he toko iwi, ko Catherine Manning, toko ingoa. E kaimahi ana hau tākari mai te ata, Regional Stop Smoking Service Regional Manager. I'm here in the capacity today as a member of ATA, which is the Aukati Tupeka Kore National Supply Group for smoke-free. I have been doing this mahi far too long, actually 15 years now. I've been in here previously in Tāmaki Makaurau. More recently, in the last 5 years, I managed the lower half of the North Island stop smoking services, starting from Te Horo right through to Wellington and up to the Wairarapa. Why am I here? I applaud this council for your brave and courageous movement, including smoke-free, vape-free in your policy. Congratulations. You will have known that last year in November, the government finally, after 11 years, launched a smoke-free plan. I'm asking this council actually to be more deliberate in your response to this plan. And that the council have outlined 6 action areas which are totally relevant to this council. More specifically, action area 6, which looks at a smoke-free generation. And I know that this council is proactive, ensuring that our rangatahi, our young people of this region, have things in place that are future-proofing them to well-being. What that means is, yesterday I decided that I would work from home, because normally I go down to Seaview and Lower Hutt where I'm based, and I decided I'd work from home yesterday, and I come to the world famous in Levin Sponge Kitchen, because the chocolate eclair there is second to none unless you're in Waikuni, and then you just can't beat it. But I actually walked away, and I walked away because the streets of Levin are littered with cigarette butts and smoke and vaping that are happening on our public streets. And I was actually disheartened. I was disheartened because there was a woman sitting there with a disabled young person who she was clearly a caregiver to, and smoke was drifting in his airspace. And I realised that this council has the ability to make public spaces like the ones we have our outdoor dining safe for our kids and our public and people like me who want to enjoy the fresh air of Horowhenua. But I can't, because it's impossible in outside Whispers and outside the Sponge Kitchen to sit there and enjoy that fresh air that exists for everyone else, except for, of course, the carbon monoxide from the traffic, because you are allowing smoking and vaping in our public spaces. The other thing you could do, this council has the ability to do, is your local stop smoking provider is Tome, Te Ohu Mutinga, Oahi Kore Mutinga. They are a resource for the citizens and ratepayers of Horowhenua. They're a free resource, a face-to-face service that equips our whānau with stop smoking support. You have the ability to put them up on your website so that the residents and ratepayers of this region have access to that stop smoking support. They are local, most of you know, if you don't, you would know Uncle Peter Daly. His daughter, Lapa Daly, is the local quick coach for this region, along with Ricky. They're born and bred here, so they're getting local support. They know our whānau really well. So by putting them up on your social media page, putting them up on your website and creating an access point for our residents and ratepayers, you are saying that we are not just putting up a position statement or policy around smoke-free, vape-free, but we're also directing you or linking you to where you can get the support you need should you be ready to be smoke-free, vape-free. In the end of this month, the government is going to be calling for submissions to the implementation of the Smoke-Free Action Plan. This council, if you are keen on making a submission, as a member with the Cancer Society of ATA, I would be more than happy to come home here and support you in the development of whatever it is you need in terms of the submission from a local government perspective. I will be seeing most of you at the local government conference that is happening next month. I will be there supporting ATA there and all the other partners that are coming along to advocate to the different councils around what's happening around smoke-free. You will see the different responses from different local governments around what smoke-free looks like. Some councils are way behind. Some are like yourself that have taken some brave, fearless steps around making sure that our residents and ratepayers are protected in a way that you are equipped to do. So thank you. That's what I've come for. Any questions?
Kia ora, Kath. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Jennings.
Just one question from me, and I don't mean to be argumentative about this point, I'm genuinely inquiring. Is there an argument that if you limit the ability of a person to smoke, or in this case vape, in an outdoor setting, in a public space, that they're then more likely to take that into a private setting, like an enclosed car or a dwelling, where there could be children or other family members present? And so essentially where there's sort of an unintended consequence of limiting a person's ability to vape outside, and that it actually drives it inside and then causes further harm.
I'm answer you like this, and I don't see it being confrontational at all, because believe it or not, I have had so many different types of questions posed. 60,000 people have passed away from smoking-related illnesses since the inquiry into tobacco control. This isn't council's mandate to operate is to protect its citizens and ratepayers. That's why you sit here under the Local Government Act, to protect, to serve, and to ensure that well-being is had. You can only control the environments from which you are mandated to do so. Those who choose to go elsewhere, it's not your job to direct them as to where they can smoke. I mean, you all know who my auntie is. She's a celebration of all smoking, all things smoking. It's not about her, it's about the generations that exist now and the future generations to come. Vaping, clearly there are some unknowns around vaping. We do not want to normalise that behaviour. We can see that it's become an epidemic amongst our young people. If they go inside to their private spaces, that's the environment they control. I'm asking you to take leadership on the environments you control.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you very much for your submission. On the particular issue of the public spaces, there are no smoke in public spaces, given the unknowns around vaping, but acknowledging also that the general wisdom is that vaping is much less harmful for you than smoking, free to challenge that, do you see that there should be a distinction maybe in terms of a ban on smoking, cigarette smoking, but not on vaping as a first step? Question.
I think that there is so many unknowns around vaping that are you prepared to risk your grandchildren's future on a situation where we just don't know? We just don't know, and that's, I remember standing before Howard College came to see me when I was in public health and asked me, we've got this situation 10 years ago where kids are coming to school with vapes and e-cigarettes. It was actually cigarettes back then. What should we do? And we said, you need to have a policy in place that protect your school. Now here we are 10 years down this track, and every single school, alternative education, anywhere where our young people sit, it's become so out of control now that we can't control it. Normalising a behaviour that we know isn't safe or well for our kids, because our aspiration isn't for our kids to be addicted. Because the thing that's in a vape is nicotine, and nicotine is the addictive factor in a cigarette and a vape. So I don't have any desire for my grandchildren or future great-grandchildren to be addicted to any product. So I'm asking council in a ward I pay rates to please protect that. And yeah, I'm no doubt I'm not a fan of vaping, because actually the heart is the most precious thing we have. The ability to breathe. The only thing that is that should be in our lungs is fresh air. And the term 95% safe free around vaping came from the tobacco companies. It didn't come from the health sector.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate your time and making the effort to be here, and you've certainly added to the conversation. Appreciate it. Thank you.
My rate's full.
Good on you. We appreciate it. Kerry, welcome to the table. Pretty familiar with how that works, I'm sure.
As long as it stays on, it'll be fine. Right. Kia ora koutou, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm going to basically be reinforcing a lot of what Catherine said. I'm going to be here today to talk about the smoke-free and vape-free policy and the sun protection policy that you've got before you today. So I too would like to say congratulations on the smoke-free and vape-free policy. It's really encouraging to see your commitment to Smoke-Free 2025 and the aspirational leadership in promoting smoke-free and vape-free environments as the norm for this community. And just picking up on Sam on your question about vaping suddenly going through to a private space, I think for all of us working in this area, we've always been very clear about why we do this. It's always been about the future generations, about what kind of world do we want to create for our children and grandchildren. And often when I've talked to people that have smoked, they don't want their children and grandchildren taking on a habit like that. And if it means that they are not doing it in front of their children, that's one way that we can look at the role modelling that happens when people are vaping. So that's something that is of concern. So we need to see that vape-free needs to be included in the smoke-free environment policy. It's going to reduce the risk of vaping becoming normalised. Will minimise the role modelling of vaping to children and lessen the risk that they'll see it as a cool recreational behaviour. For your question about cars, well, we now have regulations in place that actually ban vaping in cars if they're carrying children under the age of 18. So that came into effect November last year. So Catherine did such a great job of doing this. So I think one of the most compelling arguments for me was when Dame Tarian Turia said, the story and history of tobacco is in our urapa, our burial places. My own father died of emphysema, and I think at far too young an age, and that legacy, that pain that his death caused our family has stayed with me, my children, my grandchildren. We're all very aware of the impact of smoking, and we don't want to see that continue. So my note of caution, though, about the smoke-free and vape-free policy is that at the moment it lacks the inclusion of an implementation plan. A plan would actually enable a coordinated awareness campaign with community and local business education and support, clear, effective messaging, budget being assigned for signage and resourcing to make the policy work. With respect to the sun protection policy, I also make the following comments. Once again, it's really encouraging to see the commitment made in this policy. I actually worked with Peter Shaw on the development of the original sun protection policy, and that was held up as a gold standard across New Zealand. So looking at the original policy and looking at this one, there's a few things I'd like to see put back into the policy that you've got before you. So the recommendations I have: an implementation plan with designated funding for shade. A shade audit would help identify future shade planning needs. A street tree policy to ensure appropriate selection and maintenance of street trees. And the planting was so aware now that the impact of climate change, planting trees is going to be one very positive strategy that we have to address climate change. To encourage contractors and employees to be SunSmart role models, the provision of SunSmart sunglasses, hats and long sleeve shirts gives staff the means to be SunSmart role models. Also, training modules on early detection and skin cancer could be part of induction and training for new and existing staff. I've been part of delivering things like this, and I'm always amazed at people that will come up to me afterwards and they start unbuttoning their shirt and say, "Can you have a look at this? Is this something I need to be worried about?" And so often they don't know, but they know it's something that's a little bit they're not too sure about, but they're worried about it. And usually my advice is, "Can you please go and get that checked?" And the number of times people have come back saying, "I'm so glad you told me to do that, because it turned out to be something that needed cutting out." The Cancer Society too we offer our support for SunSmart community events with our event planning toolkit. And I'd like to offer my support to council staff to strengthen these policies. So let's continue to put the health and well-being of our community, and in particular our most vulnerable, at the heart of our decision making. Let's work together to reduce the rates and impact of smoking related cancers and melanoma in our community. So thank you for listening.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Kerry. Any questions for Kerry? Councillor Jennings.
Thanks, Gary. And I acknowledge you've made some really good submissions in the past, in particular the long-term plan about the shading audit in particular. And I think the answer that we were given in response to that submission at the time was that council obviously is in terms of its design of new parks and public places, obviously takes shading into account, and that's part of the design process. But in terms of that shading audit that you're talking about, how would you see that working? Is that something that would be done in partnership with your organisation, or does that need to be council-led in terms of just going around to every public site, or are you suggesting sort of targeted sites like playgrounds? So could you just give me some more detail on exactly what you anticipate that audit looking like?
One of the things that I discovered when I was writing a submission to Palmerston North City Council on a shade proposal, shade audit, well, they actually had prepared a shade audit report, And what I discovered was that so often the parks in our poorer areas are often the ones that are least well serviced as far as shade is concerned. And so that was a priority right from the start. If you start talking about, we've got all these parks, which one shall I start with first? Then that would be a recommendation that start with those ones first. See how are they serviced in terms of shade. It is something that I think strategically a shade audit would then give you it sort of give you a plan as to how you're going to deal with shade. I can certainly share resources that I've ended up discovering from other councils on that process. And a really good one was, that Palmerston's just finished, is they were able to straight away be able to prioritise based on how many trees, what kind of shade structures, and that helped form their work plan for the next 10 years.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Mary. Question, have you considered the merits or otherwise of having a bylaw for each of these two policies?
Smoke-free, there's a bylaw that I think Palmerston's the only council in the country that has a bylaw as far as smoke-free outdoor dining, but they've been able to create it because of the licences that often cafes will apply to be able to use that public space, that public footpath. I think as far as smoke-free is concerned, often it seems that reading policies that the policies will mention that it's actually not an enforceable policy, which straight away bylaws gets into a whole different area, doesn't it? Sun protection, sun smart policies, I've never thought of those as being under the umbrella of a bylaw, but I mean it would be amazing to see councils across the country address the need for shade. I mean, we've got the highest rate of melanoma deaths in the world. It's not a record we can be proud of, so we do need to address it.
Thank you, Kerry. Appreciate your support and advocacy again for these topics, and good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, councillors, going back to procedure items, any late items? None. Any declarations of interest? None. Any announcements? None. Thank you. Moving to the confirmation of the minutes for our meeting of council on the 11th of May 2022. Could I have a mover and a seconder that these are true and correct record? Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Moving to 7.1. Proceeding of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee minutes. Just moving receipt of those minutes. Councillor Allen, second, Councillor Brannigan, all those in favour? Thank you. And the Finance and Audit Risk Committee minutes of Wednesday the 25th of May 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those as well? Councillor Allen, Councillor Jennings, all those in favour? Thank you. Against? Carried. Right, moving to the reports. 8.1 is the Project Steering Group discussion overview. Just a minute. 7.2, let's go back. So 7.2 is the proceedings of the Community Wellbeing Committee from the 10th of May. Can I move 2.1, 2.2 that these minutes be received? Moved Councillor Kay Simmons, seconded Deputy Mayor Mason. All those in favour? Thank you. Sorry, now move to 8.1. which is the project steering group discussion overview. Can I move 2.1, 2.2 that these that the report be received? Councillor Mitchell, thank you. Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Any items for discussion in that update? Councillor Keru.
Just around the live-in digestion maintenance and upgrade. I just wanted to know, how long has that been in place for us, and how long? Why do we need an upgrade?
Through your worship, the digester was planned for some scheduled maintenance, plus it also had some broken parts that needed repair. So it was taken offline for a complete overhaul, and it's currently being commissioned to bring back online.
Through your worship, if I could just add, Councillor Keto, this particular item was of interest to the project steering group because of the concerns that it raised around the state of that infrastructure, and there was a commitment by officers that we would do some work to come back with a more holistic picture about current state but also future state and what that might mean in terms of investment over the next 12 months and in terms of renewals and capital programs. So that is an item that we're imminent in booking with elected members to brief you all.
Thank you. Moving on to 8.2, the mayoral report. I'll move that this report be received. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Brannigan. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Are there any questions of this report? Councillor Jennings.
Mr. Mayor, you've provided some email updates to us in relation to the Coalition for Local Democracy meetings that you've attended, which is around this council's stance on opposing the proposed Three Waters reforms. And so thank you for providing those updates. I just wondered whether you might provide just a quick verbal overview for the public, potentially just to update them where that currently sits in terms of our participation in that campaign.
I suppose there's a couple of things to note. One, there hasn't been another meeting of C4LD since that last meeting, and there has been obviously the release of the draft legislation, which is now being considered by C4LD. I think the other thing of note is the current court case that the three councils that are asking that it's illegal for the government to take away the assets being considered at the moment through Waimakariri, Whangarei and Timaru are the three councils that are taking that, and it's currently before the courts at the moment. But there's no further update as such as from what you received last month, no.
I was actually going to ask, is it appropriate for me to add two things to your community wellbeing meeting in your bullet points there, since you moved so fast when you got to 7.2?
We've just received the minutes. Certainly.
Okay, so and just to note that we're adjusting the attendance list for the last community wellbeing meeting. So today's update for COVID. Palmerston North continue to be the epicentre of the outbreak with approximately 53% of current active cases. Weekly reporting, public reporting of new case numbers, cases in hospitals, any deaths and a snapshot of how cases are spread around our region. This reporting begins next Monday on the 13th. That'll be through social media and in local media. Currently, there are 13 COVID-19 patients in Palmy Hospital. Non-urgent, deferrable, planned care surgeries have been postponed, and their teams are currently working to support patient care and flow. So there are several initiatives they're looking to implement in the ED department, such as the telehealth options, which I think I talked about through the last community wellbeing. And regarding previous youth issues that we had, this was a topic that we had at community wellbeing. All of the stakeholders had a say on this. There's a reasonable number of youth that are currently disengaged from education, and it is growing post-COVID. The attitude changing from kindness, we're all in this together, to one of anxiety, mistrust and anger has been evident. So we talked at length about solutions and what had worked in the past, and it was favoured to wanting to re-establish the Cactus program, which had proven successful with over 200 students participating in the last 8 years that it ran. So there's also a junior version of Cactus for years 7 to 8, which we think would also benefit the youth in our community. So the Cactus stands for Combined Adolescent Challenge Training Unit Support, and 25 students over an 8-week program which aims to focus on the physical fitness, improve confidence, improve teamwork and develop leadership skills. Basically the committee all agreed of the importance of this partnership between young people, police and our community, and we clearly voiced our desire for Cactus to be re-established by sending a letter off to the local police to add weight to that argument, so now we're waiting.
It'll be interesting to see the response back from police in regards to that, because some of the conversations that I've had with police in recent days, they don't support Cactus continuing. It's come from a high level, not necessarily local, so it'll be interesting to see the response that does come back for that.
We were asked by the police to support it.
Yeah,
so
local police, this is,
yeah. Okay.
I just wondered whether, Jacinda, you could give us a quick update on where the mayoral relief fund sits at present.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. At the moment we have received a total of 265,000 in terms of donations. In terms of applications, we have received 49 applications as of today, with total funds requested of 217,000. Of that, we have granted 29,711, and that's 33 applications that we've granted. At this stage, the upfront policy was to grant $1,000 upfront to those 30, and then up to $1,000 upfront, and then they'll be reassessed after the applications close at the end of the week to potentially grant more to the applications that have already been received.
Thank you. Okay, so moving to 8.3, Council Resolution Actions Monitoring Report. Recommendation 1.1, 1.2 that this report be received. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Allen. Second, Councillor Mitchell. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Just going to hand this to the Chief Executive to look after.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, I'll take this report as read. This is what you know will now be a standing item on every council and committee agenda, reminding council that once we report it as blue completed once, then it falls off the monitoring report. So that this is about giving you visibility and line of sight over those decisions you've made in the past and how we're progressing. I'm happy to take any questions, or my team are here with regards to any specific actions.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Mayor Wandin. Just given that we had submissions in relation to it and some conversation about the is it item 22/166 and the Windmill Trust and Foxton Tourism Development Association looking at alternative storage, I see that the time frame for that to be completed is the 30th of June, and the tram will be relocated at that time. Is that on track?
So through Your Worship, officers have been working with the Windmill Trust, who I understand are really happy with how things are progressing in terms of the work that will need to happen in the old tram site. We have contractors ready to go. We're just working through the process with FTDA for the tram to be removed. And we've been really clear about our expectation that happen as soon as possible. Ideally, we would have had that done and had the work completed so that the cafe was up and running for the 20th, 4th of June, when we've got the Lights Festival at Te Awaho Newsroom for Matariki, but we're just working through patiently with the FTDA for them to move the tram on as per the resolution of Council.
Councillor Jennings.
Mate, just wondering, in terms of compiling this report, how far did you look back? Like, was there a date cut-off that we used as a starting point?
Through your worship, the last 6 months is what I asked council officers to do, but would acknowledge that we could go back further, but that to simply get something on the agenda, I asked for the last 6 months.
Can I just follow that? So from a pragmatic perspective, if elected members were aware of previous resolutions that are still active, that would be helpful to provide that through to you guys in addition to the report.
Absolutely, and the other comment I'd make is what's not on this agenda because it wasn't quite ready is the long-term plan monitoring resolution report. So obviously there were a number of resolutions that council passed during the long-term plan. Some of those things have progressed, but some of them, we need to be reporting back to council on how those items have been progressed. So council can expect to see that in the August council agenda.
Councillor Tukupa.
Just as a follow-up about the tram, a couple of meetings ago through the Foxton Community Board report or minutes, there was mention of that organisation or removing all the tram lines through the Foxton Township, and I questioned it and asked, was that cost going to be shared, or because there was a situation unfolding, and I'd just like to know where did that land.
Through your worship, the removal of the tram lines is a different issue from the horse-drawn tram, and elected members know that, and the trolley, that's the trolley bus wires, is a matter before the courts at the moment, and we're just waiting for a ruling.
They're two different activities. Yeah. We now move to 8.4, the monthly Chief Executive Report. Could I move 2.11 and 2.12? The report be received. Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? And I'll now hand to the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Your Worship. So councillors, look, in time, the intention would be that this is a reflection of the organisation performance. But for now, this report is kind of capturing all those things we want to update council on, or where some decisions are needed where it doesn't quantify a report by itself. There are clearly some items where I'm updating you on key items of pieces of legislation or some reform progress in relation to local government, and I'm happy to take questions on that. But if I would just draw your attention to the three items that ultimately we're seeking a decision from council on. One is off the back of council workshop where we have sought your advice, and a discussion has commenced around the establishing a district plan working party and looking for elected members to be appointed to that working party to work with officers as we progress our plan change aspirations. The second is off the back of the tornado, recognising the leadership role you as elected members took in setting up that mural relief fund, but recognising that recovery goes longer than just what happened on day one or day two, and looking for elected members' support or endorsement for the scope of that recovery plan. And then third, receiving the annual report, but also appointing a proxy to attend on our behalf at the Civic Financial Services AGM, which I anticipate is not a new item for council. This is something that you would typically see about this time every year. So we're happy to take questions on any of those three items, as well as the individual updates that sit within the agenda.
So firstly, are there any questions or clarifications needed of the report? Councillor Keru.
Just in terms of the working party group for the district, How are we including mana whenua in those discussions with that group?
Thank you. The District Plan Working Party would be working with officers. Officers have a separate process where they are engaging with iwi directly. So that feedback from the direct engagement with iwi would obviously be fed back into the conversations with the working party, but just in terms of timeframes and logistics, those will actually be two separate processes happening in parallel, but certainly interfacing. Councillor Tupapua.
Just a question and a request. So for 2.1.4, the recovery plan on page 33, under number 6, could you please add Solway Park, which will cover the southeast of Levin and the streets like Strathmore Ave, Sky Street, Perth Street, Solway, Stirling and Awatere. The question for 2.1.5, the Civic Financial Services with the two schemes, and one is the LAPP Disaster Fund, and that's specifically for underground infrastructure, which if we weren't like Three Waters, if we're no longer the owners of that, yet we've put the financial contribution into this fund for that. Will we be getting that back? What's happening?
Through your worship, any contribution that we make in a particular year for the past typically would relate to that particular year, so we wouldn't receive that back. But we have an investment of over, I think it's 200,000 in Civic Financial Services, and that would likely continue regardless of the fact that the infrastructure would leave. If this council chose to, we can make a decision otherwise in that sense. Take our share back, but my understanding is that we would continue on with our investment. Is that the question that you're asking?
And I think, through the chair, I think it's an example, Councillor Takapura, of the sort of implications or ramifications of Three Waters reform that hasn't necessarily been well thought through at a national level. Next week there is a annual Chief Executives Forum, and Civic Assurance will be there. So that's certainly something I can follow up in terms of a line of inquiry. But I suspect that this is one of many examples of the sorts of things that councils are starting to think about, and the answer or direction to that is not clear.
Councillor Jennings.
And sorry, Malik, just another question under the heading Waste Legislation and Strategy Under Development. I think you expected this, probably this question, which is, are you able to give, a high-level summary of, at the moment, in terms of what the strategy is proposing, what's the role or responsibility that's likely to fall to council if the strategy proceeds, based on your contemporary understanding?
So my sense of the legislation is that where councils are a current deliverer of solid waste services, there would be an expectation that councils would fall in line and be able to deliver that. So I think an example of that is MFE's current desire around what food waste collection might look like. I don't think what we've seen is direction from the government about what council's role should be, but I think there has been some assumptions made about if councils were delivering solid waste services, their ability to deliver on the Waste Minimisation Act legislation, but also to be able to be a key enabler to transforming recycling.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Just clarification on the district plan working group. So I presume the district plan work encompasses both urban and rural, does it?
Yes.
Yes, so initially Councillor Mitchell is the work on those plan changes to reflect where additional growth for intensification is required, and councillors will recall at a workshop probably a few weeks ago that is both in urban and rural parts of our district.
Councillor,
Sorry, will you be taking nominations or?
if you finish questions, yes. So, we now move to 2.1.3 that Council resolves to establish a district plan working party to work with officers on district plan changes and appoint the following elected members. So we are seeking interest from elected members as to whether they want to be on that working party. I suppose it's envisaged that we don't need more than 3, probably, would be a good number. So happy for individual councillors to nominate themselves. If we get more than 3, then we might have to have a little discussion. Yes.
Councillor Sam Jennings.
Oh, so you don't want to be on it yourself?
If we're nominating, then I'd like to include Councillor Mitchell.
Can I just first check with Councillor Jennings and Councillor Mitchell that they're happy to be nominated? Yes. Thank you. Councillor Brannigan?
I'm hoping to nominate Councillor Allen if he's available.
Councillor Allen. So we have 3 nominations, Councillors Jennings, Mitchell and Allen. Councillor Kelly,
I'll go on to that group.
you'd like to?
Yes.
Councillor Jennings.
I was going to nominate Councillor Bishop, given his understanding and obviously experience in the construction space. That experience will be invaluable around the district planning working group.
So 5 is probably Councillor Allen.
Look, I think it needs to come to an election because there are a number of possibilities around the table. I'd like there to be an election, and I would like to nominate Councillor Mason.
I'm just going to seek some advice from the Chief Executive. I don't think there's actual pressure to finish this discussion now, but if we've got those that are interested, we have 2 more meetings before the end of this month, on the 22nd and the 29th. It may well be a topic that we can bring back for that one of those 2 meetings. Otherwise, we could be here for some time. Okay. Okay, I've just been advised that it would be good to get this over and done with tonight. Fair enough. So in that case, I'm going to ask councillors to select the 3 people that they wish to nominate for this working party. So, Councillor Allen.
I think the first step, Mr Mayor, is to agree on a number.
That's what I was just about to do. Okay, so I was going to move a recommendation that councillors agree that 3 is, and that when we do the vote, that councillors nominate the 3 people that they wish to be on this committee, the working party. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Brannigan? Put the motion, or any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
I was going to ask
the officer in charge of the whole shebang what he thought or she thought, because from my point of view, you really want people with a range of understanding of different parts of the district when you're doing this. 3 may not cut it. So could we ask that question?
Any comments, Dave?
I'm overwhelmed by the enthusiasm to be part of the District Plan Working Party. This is a great night for me. Look, the topics are, the focuses of the plan changes are going to be around the subdivision development, so particularly in the urban area, the intensification, potential changes to infill rules, but we'll also look at rural subdivision as well. So I don't think that rules any of the elected members out who have been nominated so far. I think in terms of a number, 3 or 4 would be, I think, an appropriate number just in terms of logistics and perspectives. So comfortable with where you decide to land on that. And again, just excited to have so much enthusiasm to be part of this group.
Councillor Bishop.
Question, and it may be to Mr. Corkindale, given I said on the last time we reviewed this, there was, I think, 4 councillors plus the mayor, but it was like a lengthy piece of work. It was more than 12 months, and I'm just thinking if it's, what is the time frame commitment of this? Is this going to be post-election as well, which needs to be considered, because for continuity, there needs to be some thought given to that. And how long do you envisage this piece of work going?
The piece of work will run post the election. It is different to the district plan where we were considering everything in the district plan and obviously had to and wanted to raise everything that was going to be covered in the district plan review with that working group. This year is a more targeted review, focusing on a couple of specific plan changes. It won't quite have the same level of involvement that was required for the full district plan review. I guess we've seen, and when we raised this at the recent workshop, it was using this group as a sounding board and to, I guess, test the direction and get a level of comfort with the direction of travel. So again, it's at probably a slightly higher level than maybe the district plan review group got to, where you'll recall we had to get down to the number of chickens and various other things for specific rules. I'd like to think this one does sit above that. But there will also be times where we bring things back to the full council via a workshop or a briefing, again, ahead of those key milestones.
Thank you. Okay. So, councillors, going back to that first recommendation, that we are happy that 3. Okay. So, we need some discussion then around that number. You've heard David talk about 3 or 4. So, just your views initially on how many you think should be there.
Yeah, for me personally, 3 I think is a fit for the role.
I'd like to see 4.
Sorry, Councillor Bishop.
If we're talking the total number, is it your intention to sit on that group as ex officio, which would add, if it's 3 we're talking about, then we've got 4 by default.
Yes.
So is it your intention?
Yes.
So we've got 4 if we have 3, yeah. I'm comfortable with that number. I mean, given it's not a decision-making forum, we don't need a majority,
no, exactly.
But I think it needs to be a balanced view that it's not a personal opinion, it's a representation from the pressures that are out there.
Any other views? Okay. So let us just put that first recommendation that we are going to appoint 3 elected members plus the Mayor as ex officio to this working party. Can I just put that? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brannigan, thank you. All those in favour? Against? Okay, thank you. So now we need to ask each elected member the 3 names that they wish to put forward for this working party. We have 6, Councillor Jennings, Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Allen, Councillor Kedu, Councillor Bishop and Deputy Mayor Mason are the 6 elected members currently interested in being on that working party.
I'm happy to stand out.
Happy to stand out?
Yeah.
Okay, so withdrawing Councillor Mason, Deputy Mayor Mason, sorry. It's it, yep. Ketu, Bishop, Jennings, Mitchell, Allen. So I'm going to ask individual councillors by alphabetical order, starting with Councillor Allen.
Councillors Mitchell, Bishop and Ketu.
Councillor Bishop. Sorry, just turn your mic on.
Bishop, Jennings, Ketu.
Councillor Brannigan.
Allen, Mitchell, Bishop.
Councillor Isaacs. Sorry, someone's got their mic. Sorry.
Bishop, Mitchell, Ketu.
Councillor Jennings.
Bishop, better vote for myself, and Ketu.
Councillor Kay Simmons.
Ketu, Mitchell, Allen.
Councillor Mitchell, sorry, Deputy Mayor Mason.
Ketu, Mitchell, Allen.
Councillor Mitchell.
Bishop, Mitchell, Allen.
Councillor Tukapua.
Top 3.
And myself, Ketu, Bishop, Mitchell. Thank you. So, following that vote, I'll now put 2.1.3 that Council resolves to establish a district plan working party to work with officers on district plan changes and appoint the following elected members: Councillors Ketu, Bishop and Mitchell. Moved by Councillor Isaac, seconded by Councillor Allen. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now move to 2.1.4 that Council adopt the Tornado Community Recovery Plan. Are there any clarifications or questions sought on that? Could I then have a mover and a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Jennings. Any further discussion? Put the motion, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So we'll put 2.1.5 and 2.1.6 together. The Council received the annual report for civic financial services and agree to appoint Nicola Mills, a Director of Civic Financial Services Limited, as the proxy for the Civic Financial Services Annual General Meeting, and that Council record the appointment and remuneration of the OAG as Auditor of Civic Financial Services. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Mitchell and seconded Councillor Jennings. Any discussion? All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. To 8.5, which is the to receive the report for voting for the Electorate Trust election 2022, noting that this is for 3 candidates, not as in the headline purpose for 2. But can I first move that the report be received 2.1, 2.2? 2.1, 2.2. Councillor Allen, Councillor Bishop, all those in favour? Against? Carried. So first of all, we need to just put through the recommendation, or the 2.3, that Horowhenua District Council proceeds or does not proceed with exercising its voting rights for the Electorate Trust 2022 trustee elections. Councillor Allen.
I move that it proceeds.
I actually just had a question, which was as the holder of 145 accounts, does that mean that if we do participate, essentially it's 145 votes? How does it work? So it's significant. Yeah.
The Chief Executive thinks that that may not be the case. In fact, that she's just going to maybe, we're not going to just do a bit of work to maybe check that out. That there may be some rules under the, Voting Act for the. My understanding was that it was 1 vote per, and I think it's 1 vote per placement that you have, or one. Yeah.
Just a second, because that would be significant. That would be material for me, because 145 votes versus 1 vote has a significant impact on the potential election result.
Okay.
Your Worship, while looking at the report, it does talk about 145 accounts.
Yes.
Now in the receipt of the same number of voting papers, so I'll take that's 145. Yeah.
That's my understanding. So that, yes, so under 3 here, it does say Council File 145 is now in receipt of the same number of voting papers.
Through your worship, Mrs. Hurry is just going to do some quick research. But the reason I kind of gave that advice is that I'm not sure, is that I know in the council I came from, where we had a lines company that had the same membership and ownership basis, is even though we held a number of accounts, we had a limit of 8 votes, and that was based on either what was in the Constitution or what was sitting in legislation. For clarity, we only have 1 voting paper. So the report is inaccurate where it talks about us being, holding the equal number of voting papers to our accounts. So an option,
It appears, though, that from reading the material that we've got, that we do get 1 vote per connection. but if you would like us to just adjourn for 5 minutes, we'll make a phone call to someone to just confirm that.
I'd move that we adjourn for 5 minutes to do that.
Okay. I do have a motion on the table that we do proceed with the vote. So is there any discussion about that initially? Councillor Jennings.
I don't know if the mover wants to speak to it, but I want to speak against the motion. I don't think having had that clarified with 147 votes, along with that comes significant power. I see at the last election, the two trustees were elected with around 3,000, just over 3,300 votes. And so this actually voting block that we have does represent quite a significant amount of power and influence in the election result. And I guess my concern is that other than the words on the paper here at page 73 and 74, I don't have enough information about the particular people and whether they're, for example, are there conflicts of interest that we need to be aware of? What's their position on the customer discount? Those kind of things. And those for me are really material aspects that I would want to have some comfort around before exercising the vote. So that's why I'm against the motion.
Councillor Allen.
So look, as the person who moved the motion, this has been subject to discussion over the years, the extent to which we should be voting on such a considerable number of shares. I've changed my mind over the years. I was initially very much in Councillor Jennings' camp, but I make the observation that This is a fully transparent process. The fact is that we own 145 shares. That's a fact. Do we then walk away from that number of shares and not vote? I'm comforted by the fact that this will be a fully transparent process. We will be accountable through a public council meeting to the ratepayers as to how we have individually and collectively voted. When it comes to insufficient information on candidates, that's a personal responsibility, be it with an individual shareholder in the community or councillors around this table. So I don't see that as being relevant. So on balance, to me, this is another occasion where we are representing to the public to the best of our ability in a fully transparent way and exercising a right that we have.
Thank you. So I'll put the motion that we do proceed with exercising our voting rights for the Elected Trust 2022 trustee elections. All those in favour? Against? And Councillor Jennings voted against. The motion's carried. So we'll now move to the voting for 3 candidates, and again, ask the Chief Executive to put that on the whiteboard. Yes, we did. So Councillor Allen moved it, and Councillor, who seconded it? Councillor Brannigan. Yes. Okay, so this time we will do reverse alphabetical order, just to confuse everybody. So my votes are for Crosby, Duffy and Gregan. Councillor Tukapua.
Crosby, Duffy and Kirk. I'll say Kirk.
Councillor Mitchell.
Collier, Crosby and Longwood, is it?
Councillor Kedu.
Sorry? Okay. It's Crosby, Duffy, and Greg, is it? Yes.
Is my alphabet working, Deputy Mayor Mason? Councillor Kay Simmons.
Duffy, Collier, Gregan.
Councillor Jennings, are you voting?
Yeah, I'll vote then. Gregan, Longwood, Sutton.
Councillor Isaacs.
Duffy, Gregan, Crosby.
Councillor Brannigan.
Crosby, Kirk, Duffy.
Councillor Bishop.
Duffy, Gregan, Crosby.
Councillor Allen.
Crosby, Duffy, Gregan.
So 2.4 then, that the Horowhenua District Council votes for Sharon Crosby, Brendan Duffy and Stephen Gregan in the 2022 Elected Trust elections. I'll move. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. We now move to 8.6, which is a review of local election signage policy 2022. Well, first of all, just move 2.1, 2.2, that this report be received. Councillor Brannigan, seconded Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Against? Carried. So we now have the local signage policy, local election signage policy dated the 16th of May 2022. And if there are any questions, Ashley will answer them, or or introduce the report. Are there any questions that councillors wish to ask? Clarifications? Councillor Tupapua.
Yes, so I understand we're just adding another space for the Foxton or Kirikiri ward. I wondered if council would consider adding either another location for the live-in ward or expanding the existing area of the, and I'll tell you why, because in past elections there's been 17 and 19 candidates running in live-in, and now we have 2 Māori seats which are district wide, so that's add the, and there's not enough room for the signs unless you're sitting on top of each other. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I suppose there's one advantage this election, that there'll be no mid-central health board election, so we won't be competing with those signs. Where would you suggest that the possibility might be that we could put another space in live-in that's on council land?
Well, I might pick something that the officers say, no, don't go there. So I'm happy to, yeah, or what I'm saying is expand the existing area of the current spaces, like, because they're quite narrow currently, and just here and here, and that's, anyway.
I think the other thing that I noted about the village green is that there's been a reasonable degree of growth on some of those trees down there, and that hinders, the view that the public may have of any signs driving past. I don't know whether that's maybe the Parks and Reserve people can go and give them a trim or something, I'm not sure, but I'm sure. Okay.
So we have, in looking at this policy, we had done a review in terms of these sites. We didn't look at additional sites. It is something that we could look into. We'd need to come back to a meeting in June to either adopt this policy, which we can do, and bring it back. It is an option.
I suppose if Mr. Jubb is around this table, he'd be saying, just get on with it, and because I won't be putting one up anyway. Councillor Tupapua, did you have a recommendation?
Can we not proceed with the existing and then go subject to that and add it later, at the next meeting? Like go ahead with this plus that for later?
Through you, Your Worship, if that's what council chooses, we could adopt the policy, but have an additional resolution that we take the policy away to look for additional signage space, and then bring it back to either the 22nd or the 29th of June council meeting. Certainly my preference is that we would adopt the policy today, because obviously as we enter into our pre-election period, we're wanting to be able to give information to candidates or those considering candidacy as soon as possible. So to have the policy settings there, whether the maps or not are correct, would be really helpful.
Councillor Bennett.
Just to try and give some guidance to the officers, is it worth offering up some spots? I mean, I know that when you drive down Pioneer Highway come election time, it's like a who's who of local wannabes. Do we then put up, do we want to be on the main highway coming into looking at the northern end, or where there's some space up there? Or do we go left and right, looking east and west?
We are talking about council land.
That's council land, that's not state highway one.
We can look at those options. I'm sure officers will be able to offer some other areas that they may talk about. Deputy Mayor Mason.
I just wanted to offer, if Councillor Tukupa was moving that, then I would be happy to second it.
Can we just deal with 2.3 and 2.4 first, as recommended? Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, so if you're going to deal with 2.4, I have a bit of an issue with the wording of 2.4. So did you want me to outline that out now?
Are you wishing to make an amendment to that recommendation?
Yeah, well, so maybe I'll turn it into a question for the Chief Executive, which is, from my perspective, it would be useful for their... Well, sorry, do you anticipate that resolution involving a process by which we have a policy decision around whether we should actually seek to control and enforce signage on private properties? Because that's, for me, is the starting point.
Through you, Your Worship, yeah, that is the intent of the resolution. So we were quite deliberate in not using the word bylaw in that resolution and instead putting enforcement mechanism, because there is no decision of council to enforce it. That would be kind of the starting point.
Okay, so let's go back to 2.3, 2.4. Councillor Brannigan.
So just clarification on that then, what is the intention on the use enforcement mechanism for the use of the square signage and private properties are around the guidelines around size of signage, words and all that sort of stuff that I think Warwick Lamp outlined. Is that the intention?
So the intention of this resolution is for council to essentially signal that they would like us to do some work around what an enforcement mechanism or options could be, recognising that a bylaw is a mechanism, but actually we haven't done the work, nor have we got the advice ready for council around what is the mechanism. So that resolution, like if there are some views around the table on how it could be worded differently, I think we're up for that. We had a number of versions of how we described that enforcement mechanism, from enforcement document to enforcement mechanism. We were trying to describe something that wasn't a bylaw, because that's not a decision that this council table have made.
Councillor Allen?
My suggestion is that 2.4 lapses. That's something that can be brought following the election as a matter in its own right. I don't think it needs to be, given there's some unease or around the table, I see no reason for it to be on the table tonight. I suggest it come after the election as a recommendation.
So maybe then we just need a recommendation that comes off the table then. Are you willing to move that?
No, it currently has no status. It's a recommendation and it can lapse.
Okay.
I believe, but...
So yeah, I think all you need is a mover of 2.3, and I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Councillor Jennings is moving 2.3. Councillor Allen is going to second it. Is there any further debate or conversation? In that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. And with Councillor Jennings?
Yeah, and then I was just going to be helpful and move that a second resolution that council officers investigate additional sites in Levin for the purposes of subsequent adoption or potential adoption at the next meeting.
In Levin. Explore the, yeah. Deputy Mayor Mason.
Can I ask a point of clarification on that from Councillor Jennings? Is it additional sites or options for an additional site? Are we looking at
multiple options, or are we looking at an additional site?
I think I'd like to give officers scope to look at additional sites, to investigate at least and potentially bring back some options, not just a single option. It may be that there is only one option, but I think we should leave it open.
Just while we're Ashley is typing that, you will be aware of legislation that has just been, or will be passed before the election cycle, that government's removing the need to put a private address on any election signs or material. We'll have to have some sort of identification of whether it be a Facebook page, a website, or postbox or anything like that, but they're removing the need to put a private residential address on it.
So the recommendation reads, council officers investigate and propose options on additional sites for signage in the live-in ward for possible adoption as part of the policy.
Do we need to put a... Yeah, that's right. The intent is there. And I'm sure we can... So Councillor Jennings is moving there. And seconded by Councillor Allen. Any further debate or discussion? Put the motion, all those in favour? Against? Carried, thank you. Okay, we now move to 8.7, which is the review of the smoke-free and vape-free environment policy. Can I move 2.1, 2.2, that this report be received? Councillor Kay Simmons is moving. Deputy Mayor Mason is seconding. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So, welcome Tanya. Thank you. Is there anything you want to introduce your report? Or the report?
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. I would like to just acknowledge the two submitters, Catherine and Kerry, for your quality and information that you shared. That was really good, thank you. I'll take the report and the policy as read. The review of this policy was a long-term plan 2021 to 41 action item. Minor changes have been made to the policy, and they were we updated the policy to align with the changes to the Smoke-Free Environment Act 1990, which was amended to the Smoke-Free and Regulated Products Act 1990. This amendment included the vaping to the legislative language. The policy for councils in education and advocacy policy. A question has been raised around introduction of a bylaw or an option of a bylaw. However, upon review with internal officers, the decision was to continue as an education and advocacy policy. And you'll also, could we have on the screen, please? Ashley, we have up on the screen is New Zealand Council's smoke-free outdoor policies and spaces map. And so this gives us a visual of councils right across the country and how they apply smoke-free policy or bylaws and where they apply. For Horowhenua, we have smoke-free green spaces, events, council buildings and transport hubs. We can put this out so councillors can see that a bit clearer, possibly. So that gives us an idea of where we sit across
all councils. And thank you for your time. I'm happy to take questions.
Tanya, Catherine raised the issue of outdoor dining areas attached to our footpaths. Can you just give us an idea? Can we extend the policy to include those, or is that part of the policy of the dining establishment itself that has to control it?
I would think policy could be reviewed to look at that area, or possibly the public outdoor places. Policy also has areas in it of pathways, footpaths, littering. So we're talking, there's a possibility around the littering that comes with smoking. So there's options to be looked at if that's the direction.
So just through the chair, for clarity, so the public places bylaw is in the absence of a smoke-free bylaw, the public places bylaw is the mechanism you would use to advance any of your, the outcomes you might be seeking in terms of outdoor spaces, particularly in relation to outside shops, cafes, restaurants.
Do we know when that's due for review?
So next financial year.
Okay, so any time after July 1 then. All right, thank you.
So the map is actually being reviewed right now. The smoke-free council's map.
Councillor Jennings.
Your Worship, could we get some clarification from Catherine around, because I understood she was suggesting that the policy should be extended to essentially public streets, not just outdoor dining areas. That's what I'd like clarification on.
I thought I mentioned there was some comment from the gallery just before around potential around where the council is leasing, where cafes or eating facilities are leasing from council, then there may be some capacity within the lease itself to decide or to specify what can and can't be done on that space as well.
Just to probably make the difference, that obviously the reason for a bylaw is so that we could enforce it, or we have the power to make those decisions. Where we don't own the land or own the bit outside the shop, we'd need a bylaw. The policy wouldn't allow for that, and the public places bylaw is the place in which we could do that.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Your Worship, and acknowledging the submitters, and thank you, Tanya. Thank you for bringing this this policy. I guess the bottom line is, and it might be that this question is to the Chief Executive, is that this is just a policy. It's not enforceable, but it needs to have some teeth, and it does rely on education around enforcement. And we've all got the stories of standing on the sports grounds where people are smoking, or being at the cafe where people are smoking, and detracting from the enjoyment of fresh air. And we heard from one of the submitters about an implementation plan. What's the possibility of actually giving this policy some more enforcement power?
So through Your Worship, it's a policy. It doesn't have teeth. It would need to be a bylaw. So if council wanted to extend its role from education into enforcement, then I think that's some advice that you could request council officers bring back on the opportunity around a bylaw. I would note that Palmerston North City Council are the only council across New Zealand with a bylaw, and that's not to say that council shouldn't look at that. But I suppose the question for the council table is, of your priorities right now, is this a priority, or do you feel that the policy is enough for setting the signal, but also the expectation around the role we play in education?
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I could see trying to enforce this through a bylaw being an absolute nightmare, but I do notice on the map that quite a few district councils actually had the central business area as hopefully smoke-free. And I was just wondering if you knew how that went. Were people less likely to smoke in that central business area if it was part of the smoke-free policy?
So it's a bit like the dog thing. There is, expectation that there be no dogs in the central business district, but I see dogs every day. And I think the smoke thing is probably reasonably similar. There might be a law against it, but it will not, unfortunately, stop people from continuing to do it. And it is really just trying to educate and, have signs, and hopefully, as I've always said, dogs can't read signs, so that's why they, continue to use the. But yeah, as Deputy Mayor Mason says, it's about education and trying to, put signage up maybe and things like that. Deputy Mayor Mason.
A supplementary question then through you, Your Worship, to the CU. Do we have adequate budget to provide for signage and to ensure that that message is getting out there? Because bearing in mind that this is aspirational in terms of trying to inform the thinking of, children and youth and make changes that are long lasting. So have we got adequate provision for that education?
Through Your Worship, I understand that this piece of work has involved a whole lot of people from across the organisation, and we wouldn't have put a policy forward that didn't have budgets to be able to deliver it. I suppose it's about understanding whether the intent and spirit of the policy on the table aligns with the spirit and intent of how far council would like to go in terms of its education role. So, I suppose I'd want to manage expectations by saying that there is probably some assumptions here that council will continue to do the work that it is doing, and hopefully some improvements on the basis of the why. What would be helpful is some guidance from the table around, off the back of obviously the impassioned public speakers, or knowing that there is an impending review of our public places bylaw, whether there is a desire for council officers to put some work into how that public places bylaw might reflect some further advancements in this area.
Councillor.
So I make comments under two headings. First of all, I support the recommendation that the policy be adopted. I think anecdotally that the education and public support of this policy has done the business pretty well. So I support that. However, I don't want us to lose sight of the submission from Catherine, which I think was a very, very appropriate one, around people being the unwilling victims of, smoke and vaping in public areas. And so I'd like to suggest, and whether it requires a motion or not, I don't know, I'd like to suggest that be captured when the public places bylaw is put out for consultation next year, that form part, the recommendation that form part of the public consultation.
I don't think we need a formal resolution to ask the Chief Executive to do some work in terms of the open places policy. The expectation is that would come back to council in the next financial year, and we could do some further work on that. I don't believe it needs a resolution. I think we can just ask for that to be done. In that case, can I then move 2.3 that the council adopt the smoke-free and vape-free environment policy? Could I just I'll get back to you, Wayne. Can I just have a seconder for that? Councillor K. Simmons. Councillor Bishop.
Sorry, further to Councillor Allen's angle, I just think it would be appropriate to formalise that purely as on the back of the participation from our public and the quality of the submission, and just to give another level of assurance that the effort taken has been recognised by the table and then through to the staff. I think, we're crying out for public participation of good quality, and if we're not recognising it, it's a simple formal thing that we can do. I think it sends a good signal.
So let's first do 2.3, and then Chief Executive and Democracy Support will put a resolution together for following that. So I'll put the motion that Council adopts the smoke-free and vape-free environment policy. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So has the recommendation been captured?
Recommendation reads that Council, in reviewing its public places bylaw, looks to see how to bring the spirit of the smoke-free and vape-free policy into this bylaw.
Councillor Bishop, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's hard to capture the essence of the submission through into that, but I think
the intent is there.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Councillor Allen?
I felt it was more specific. It was around public places / outdoor dining areas. I felt that was the specific nature of the submission.
So
as long as that is
the review of the outdoor policy will
do that.
Will do that.
As long
yes.
as it does that, then
yes.
it's fine.
Yeah. Councillor Allen, are you prepared to second that? Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
No, it's not specifically to do with that. It's just to say that there was also a suggestion that we put some information about resources to help people quit smoking on our website, that we actually followed up with that, not just agreeing or making sure that that does happen.
So, does everyone understand the intent of that recommendation? Is there any further discussion? Put the motion, all those in Councillor Jennings. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Now go to the Sun Protection Environment Policy. Could I move 2.1, 2.2 that the report be received? Councillor Allen, thank you. And Councillor Brannigan seconding. All those in favour? Thank you. Any questions or clarifications sought on the policy? Councillor Tupua.
Yes, we've got page 95, a publication version of the policy, but through the emails this morning there was a kind of just a Word document version, which it looks to me it's got a lot more detail in it, and I wondered, is it one and the same, or that's the procedures version? And if that's the case, can I ask questions, a couple about that?
So, through your worship, the document which we circulated earlier this morning, that is the draft Sun Protection Environment Policy from 2016, which was never adopted by Council. And so officers have been working with that document as the basis to help inform the review of a document that we're bringing to you today. But just for absolute clarity, that policy is not a policy because it was never adopted by council.
Okay, and so there are differences, I guess, and there's perhaps one that didn't make it to this version in front of us. Could I ask about that? So there was, talks about shade audits every 2 years, though it's not specified in this version. Do you have a time frame in mind, but it's just not said here? So the 2016 says every 2 years. This doesn't give a time. So I'm just, will there be, or it's just kind of fluid? See.
Just looking to the team for some advice. I wonder if Mrs. Hurrier puts up the visual on the screen, because what we know is that actually someone else audits us as well, and we get a rating as a council. And what you'll see on the screen shortly is that council doesn't perform too badly. There's always room for improvement. But I think right now I'm not sure whether we've got the officers in the room to give that advice around how regular the audits would be. That's a conversation we'd need to have with the Parks and Property team, but I could commit to finding that answer and coming back to you.
The light green is good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that the 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. restriction didn't make this cut. And the submitter mentioned, though I know we don't have uniforms per se, so encouraging staff to wear long sleeves or sun hats when working outdoors, that's obviously comes through. But one point the submitter did make is around designating funding. Obviously that's something we probably could do in the LTP, but following the shade inventory, obviously if there's things that are brought to our attention that we need to do sooner than the time we do LTP, will that, how and
through you, Councillor Tukupa. I think that's a really good question, and ultimately we want to make sure that the shade audit is done ahead of the review of the asset management plan for the parks and rec activity. If there are immediate concerns, if we can't do that within existing budgets, we can absolutely bring that to council and seek additional funding. But I suppose what we should all take some measure by is ultimately we could do better, but what that map is showing us is that we're not doing a terrible job.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Kerry talked about the thing that was missing was an implementation plan, and so as that part of that is an audit. Yep. Street tree policy. Yep. Give staff protective clothing, and here in our policy it says we'll encourage them to be role models. I just want to ask, do we supply that protective clothing? Not necessarily long sleeves, because people can wear sunscreen, but does council actually provide the sunscreen or the hat for their staff if they're expected to be working out in the sun? And do we, as part of induction, if we've got people working outside, do we tell them that they need to actually be making use of the sunscreen and the hats?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we do. We supply sunscreen requirements, clothing around uniforms, if that is in their team and their job work.
We do education around staying out of the sun in the hottest parts of the day, or work plans to try and avoid that if it's physical work, and encourage people to use shade if they're having a walking meeting or something like that, just to be sensible around the times of the day in those hot periods of the year. So we do definitely encourage that work. All the vehicles have sunblock in them, so if they are out and they find themselves somewhere unexpectedly, they do have access to at least an amount of protection.
Great, thanks. So we do actually have an implementation plan, it's just not written down, so whether that was just added in so that everybody knew that one existed would ease some people's minds.
Agreed. Okay, so the motion's on the table. I'll put that the council adopt the sun protection environment policy. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So we now move to 8.9, page 99, LGNZ Conference 2022. Move 2.1, 2.2 that this report be received. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Jacinta. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Isaacs, all those in favour? Against? Carried. So recommendation is that council endorses the attendance of the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councillors Tukapura and K. Simmons at the Local Government New Zealand Conference to be held in Palmerston North from the 20th to the 22nd of July 2022. Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Bishop. Noting that there is still time if councillors wish to attend the conference. Being in Palmerston North, costs are obviously no travel or much accommodation required. So if councillors do wish to add their names to the list, can they please avail themselves of the opportunity before the 22nd or 29th of June so that we can bring another to the table. Councillor Bush.
I'm happy to be the non-travelling reserve, Mr. Mayor.
What does that mean? Councillor Mitchell.
Is there a program out so that you can actually, okay, and if you did want to attend one or two things, would it still cost $1,400 to do so?
Yeah, it's all or nothing. Yeah. So there is a link in your agenda to the conference program, which you can. Councillor Allen.
Oh, just a quick one. I refer to 3.4. Only 4 responses received to the customer surveys, very small number, but any particular message in that, in the feedback?
Good evening. So I think it's fair to say probably no. We had one that was very glowing summary of the service the team delivered, one that wasn't so glowing, and one that was somewhere in the middle.
but maybe if I could add to that, in acknowledging that we are ready to circulate our annual resident satisfaction survey, which obviously we're required to do to meet our non-financial performance measures. Ms Campbell and our communications team are leading out a new piece of software, which is called Ask Nicely, that will lead out that conversation with our community. The intention is to be able to use that software to enable more real-time conversations, acknowledging, of course, that elected members have already spoken to me about wanting to understand what our developer community are saying about council and their experience.
Councillor Brennan.
Probably to David, in terms of 3.3, David, any idea when we expect the Tonkin Taylor guidance to be received? And two, second part of that is when do you envisage to bring something back to the table to carry on that discussion?
Thank you. Through Your Worship, the report we received late last week, we are in the process of just reviewing that and setting up a meeting with the authors, which we hope to have very soon, to clarify a few points in that. Following that will be the time that we'd look to be bringing the briefing back to council to go through that. Once the report's finalised and be understood, then we'll be looking to also do that work with the development sector as well, and look to have the Tonkin and Taylor experts as part of that sector session as well.
Councillor Tukapua.
Yes, following on from Councillor Brannigan around that liquefaction, or I guess what we signalled as a less restrictive approach. It reads here that you've notified the building industry about that. Is about that new approach? Is that the? I mean, because it seems a bit backwards to me that you've notified something that we haven't quite adopted or approved, and then goes on to say that so that they can start assessing the relevant geotechnical testing, and then furthermore the need for deeper boreholes to assess groundwater, as some of the liquefaction assessments we've received are not covering this sufficiently. Like there's a whole lot that we raised and talked about, which is why it's gone back to Tonkin and Taylor. So why are we going ahead, and do you see what I just want to understand why you haven't waited for us for that briefing to take place and then the table have that sort of and give a signal, or at some point make a decision and then you communicate the result? Or am I wrong?
Yes, you're right.
I'll provide the first bit of the answer, then Megan will be able to jump the next bit. What we were conscious of is that when we brought that to council was that the draft report we needed, we obviously wanted to go back to Tonkin Taylor after that, but we also didn't want to hold up the sector as well, so we needed to give them some sense of how to potentially move forward with those, and what that guidance was likely to be requiring to go forward. There's some aspects of that guidance which won't drastically change in terms of what they need to do. The requirements are what they are. Megan, if you want to just touch on the next bit to that.
So I think, I guess, just to support what David's saying, as a building consent authority, we really have two options if we want to be working within the legislation. We either follow the letter of the MB guidance, which requires deep ground investigations for any areas other than those that are at a low level of liquefaction risk, or we adopt a policy that allows a screening approach, which is what we're trying to do. We have got interim guidance in place, and we have been quite open with the industry that we are trying to refine that guidance so that we as a BCA can have a more permissive approach for people. Now, under the approach we're currently taking, and at the end of, in February we reported to the FAR meeting that out of 99 consents that had been received between the legislative change on 29th of November and the end of January. 38 at that point were on hold for liquefaction assessments. Now currently, 35 of those 38 consents have progressed and provided the information required. Out of 143 consents in progress, we currently have 18 on hold for liquefaction assessments. So things are moving. The interim guidance we have in place is allowing people to provide the information required in most cases. There's just a few cases where those consents haven't progressed.
Councillor Bush. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I know it's important that we report timeframes, and I guess there's a statutory obligation to do that. But it's really important that the numbers that we report, certainly to the table, are meaningful. And I'd like to offer up, and whether or not there's any support from around the table, that the information coming to us is not so much just about within statutory timeframes, because we all know how that works. But I'd like to have, given the issues we've had with liquefaction recently and prior to that, Geo, I'd like to have reported the total length of time from receiving the application to approving the application, because it's totally different, and it'll give us as a table a completely different set of data or understanding of what's actually happening out there.
Through the chair, we can provide that data, but it's really important that the data is always seen in context. So it's never one thing, whether that be liquefaction or whatever that could be driving that average time frame. There could be a range of reasons. Again, we can provide the data, but it will come with some explanation as to the context, because sometimes that is completely out of council's control when things go longer than we would all maybe like to see.
And absolutely agree that there is many things around the control, but when you speak of context, I'd like that same lens or standard to be applied to how we're doing it currently, because there's no context around 87% of within the timeframes, because that doesn't say that on day whatever it's been sent out for RFIs and then there's further. It's a nonsense reporting mechanism without that context. So I'm just trying to get some balance and some context on both sides so we have some real information to discuss.
Councillor Jennings.
Can I just add to that comment? I guess it's a question through to you, Monique, is in terms of that that data set, would that allow some sort of analysis of the use of the request for further information tool? Because that's what I guess is something that gets communicated, or certainly to me as an elected member, is about the use of that tool the argument is that the tool is used to elongate the process and it slows down the process, and so that's as a governance table it would be useful to get, I guess, that context to understand how are the requests for further information being used. Is it that there's is 20 RFIs on one particular consent reasonable? I mean, I have no comparative assessment. So yeah, I don't know how that factors in.
Yeah, through the chair, and again, that data can be provided, but I also think it's about if we're going to provide that data, making sure that we bring in the other data. So the example I would use is IANZ, who audit us as a building consenting authority. They do an analysis and they give recommendations as to how councils are using the RFI objectives under the Act, and whether that is satisfactory or not. They will be making recommendations about if they see a trend of overuse of RFIs or the acceptance of incomplete applications, which is often, councils are often criticised by IANZ for accepting incomplete applications and then seeing a trend of what that means for RFIs. So yes, we can provide the data, but so long as council is prepared to see the widest context of that data, which is analysis by independent authorities as well.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
So, given the question, would it be reasonable that we could see some of that IANS reporting rather than have a whole new layer of reporting done, that could be provided to us to give some comfort to answer that question?
I don't know the status of our current building accreditation audit. Where are we at with that? So our next accreditation reassessment is in April next year, and so that's when IANS will be coming and reviewing that. Our last one was in April 2021.
Councillor Bishop.
Thank you. I think you mentioned one important word in your recent blurb there, Monique. It's about trend. And we all know that what's come down from Wellington has caused a real delay in proceedings with just a lack of available contractors in that space to provide that detail, or engineers. And I don't see anything wrong with being open about saying, okay, currently on average it takes this. And in 12 months' time, if we can see that we've got some processes, at least then we can report to say, hey, actually we know the environment, but now we've got it down to an average of this. Yes, you're always going to get the outliers, which they're constant throughout all the years and the issues that come up. But that information for me is going to be way more solid than 87% of within statutory timeframes. It's just nonsense.
Okay. Any further comments about the report? Councillor Allen.
No, just to say I've listened carefully to that discussion. I do support the point that Councillor Bishop's making.
Thank you very much. Bye. Megan. So we're moving now to 9.2, which the Chief Executive is going to introduce.
Thank you, Your Worship. This evening we're actually going to recommend that Council lay this item on the table. Councillors will recall that as part of the development of the annual plan and in looking carefully at our fees and charges, there's been some questions asked about our revenue and financing policy and whether we're currently meeting our public-private split policy objectives. And my advice to the council table is that while you could happily proceed with adopting this, I think that council would benefit from a more holistic conversation which follows on from this meeting around the annual plan, how we're meeting those public-private splits. So to ensure that you're not making some decisions here and then subsequent to this we give you some advice about how you might deal with other public-private split objectives and other activities. So that is our recommendation, but if council wish to progress with the conversation then obviously we would give advice on that.
That recommendation given with the understanding that it will be back before 1 July.
Through you, Your Worship, absolutely. So our intention would be to bring it to the 22nd of June council meeting, which is the same night that you'll consider the adoption of the annual plan, and it's also the same night that you will consider the adoption of the broader fees and charges schedule across all activities.
So, Councillor Allen, you're nodding your head. Are you happy to move that? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Case-Sons. Councillor Bishop.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just interested to think that when this might be back, because if the rationale to leave it on the table because there's some further work going to be done in this space, am I hearing a signal that there's potentially going to be some reworking, maybe some realigning or alignment to our revenue and financing policy, because I don't want to come at 11:59 p.m. and have a report that maybe has got some more information in it, but essentially that information tells the same story. And I'll like to note it now that I'll be most upset if that is the case, given the information that's been shared today, and it needs maybe an interim workshop, briefing, meeting, to understand what's going to come to that final meeting, because it's going to be all go at the limit there with a whole lot of other stuff. And this, in my view, is really, really important, because we as a table set the revenue and finance policy. We don't, we don't have a lot of levers. We set the policy, we set the public-private splits. That's our job, and it's not just to set it and then wish away that it's going to happen. We need to monitor it, and we need to make sure that it is adhered to the best and highest standard that we can actually achieve. So I'm just wanting to signal that what is the intention to bring back at that point that raft of policies, and what sort of alignment do we or can we expect to have there?
So, Councillor Bishop, the intention of us advising that elected members choose to lay this on the table is because in asking the question about the public-private split and whether the paper in front of you meets that objective, the answer is no. But the answer is that in order to resolve that, we need a wider steer from council around what that might mean for other activities of council. So I didn't want to put council in a position today where you make a decision about 2 activities without the context of what that means for some broader activities that you're then going to have to make a decision on June 22nd. For absolute clarity, the review of the revenue and financing policy is not something that council can achieve between now and the end of the financial year. The revenue and financing policy is in place. It has not been reviewed for some time, nor has its objectives been monitored. Some questions have been asked, which are the right questions to ask, but what that means is we now find ourselves in a position of having to give you some advice that says, actually, we don't think you can adopt this or consider this until we've had a broader conversation about what direction do you want to, as elected members, give us around how we might resolve the situation we find ourselves in, which is not just in relation to these 2 activities, but is in relation to the building consent activity and the dog control activity. I can't guarantee you, though, that come 22nd of June, we're not suggesting the same recommendation. What we're wanting to do is ensure that we're meeting our obligations and giving you all the information you need to make that decision.
Thank you. Can I please ask that, and whenever that discussion is held, or that session was held, or that report is put in, that I'd like to understand the hierarchy of the policies that are going to be naturally in conflict. Because if we are going to, I would have thought the revenue finance policy would be pretty high up the pecking order as far as adhere to that. Otherwise, what is the consequence of not adhering to that? Because I know that if I say, well, if we're going to adhere to that policy there, the balloon squeezes happens, and then we're going to blow out over here, and then potentially you're going to say, oh, we can't do that because that's going to throw us over our rate increase. Well, of course it is, because we've got 158 strategies and policies, and conveniently, whatever one's plucked will always win the day, I want to understand before we have that discussion which policy trumps which, or where they sit in the hierarchy, because it just seems they're always in conflict.
Through you, Worship, welcome to the world of local government and the financial strategy, of which the revenue and financing policy is one part of the jigsaw puzzle too. So you're right that in trying to resolve the situation we find ourselves in around the revenue and financing policy, yes, we're going to give you some advice about the self-imposed rates cap that council put in their financial strategy as part of the long-term plan. So the advice in terms of the hierarchy of the financial strategies, some of them will be monitored and tagged by audit if we were to breach them. As I understand it, the public-private split around the revenue and financing policy is not typically one of them, but that's some additional advice we can come back.
Councillor Jennings. Just a question for Monique. So, support the idea of laying this on the table, but obviously these fees and charges have been through a consultation process, but presumably they've been developed on the assumption that the fees are reflect the cost recovery for those activities. But the missing piece is obviously that assessment as to where they fit in terms of consistency with the revenue and financing policy. So if there is any adjustment that is required to the specific fees and charges that are listed in here, and as I suspect there will be, that's going to entail a whole new consultation process, potentially, right? Which would mean that the fees and charges that are currently in place are likely to continue in the meantime.
Councillor Jennings, I think we'd need to get some advice on that. My sense is that, whenever I've brought reports in the past to councillors where they're adopting fees and charges, I remind them that they are in fact this is a mechanism to implement your revenue and financing policy. So revenue and financing policy trumps your significance and engagement policy or the requirements around consultation. So look, we can give some advice. I accept that it's untidy, where we've been out for consultation on some numbers where on reflection those numbers don't necessarily meet our public-private split objectives. But certainly our advice to council, and you're going to hear it later in council workshop, is we're not in a position where we can resolve all of those public-private split complexities because we have other financial strategies that will restrict what we can do around the balance of rates and fees and charges.
May I just make one more comment as well? Is it just in terms of the revenue and financing policy and legislation through the adoption of the annual plan, or generally a revenue and financing policy is set as part of the LTP process? It doesn't have to be. But if a council during the 3 years on the interim period of an annual plan, of an LTP, there are always going to be instances in a lot of councils where they may not meet the policy, but generally what happens is as part of adopting that annual plan, part of the recommendations will be to note that there is some non-compliance so that it's clear to the public that that is what's happening.
Yes, can I just ask for information? When or how often does the finance revenue policy need to be reviewed? And typically, if it is a 3-year cycle, typically when in the training does it happen? Because for me, it should happen early as possible, so that council owns that decision about public-private split rather than inheriting it. And how has it aligned with our process of the last 2 rounds of that, let's say 6 years?
I can't speak to the last part in terms of history, but generally it works best to do it in year 1 or year 2, because then it takes a good amount of time to work through everything. For this council, there'll be a lot of decisions around zero-based budgeting that you want to work through, the implications then in terms of reassessing who benefits, who pays, any structural changes that might occur in an organisation about where overheads lie. Those conversations do take some time, and they're best had in either year 1 or year 2, so that there's plenty of time to implement it as part of the finalising the LTP.
Do we really need to ask another question?
No, I can give you a statement.
Do we
Look,
really need another statement?
For what it's worth, I think it just the natural fit is prior to LTP, because that's the one big bit of work, and you need those rules in place before you actually go off and do some stuff you may have to undo.
And as we'll see later on, LTP starts in August 2022.
Your Worship, just to clarify, so I had this conversation with Jacinta prior to the meeting, that we did actually resolve, and it was moved by Councillor Brannigan and seconded by Councillor Bishop, on the 3rd of June 2020 to review the revenue and financing policy as part of our LTP. Now, obviously that didn't happen, and there was also some decisions made in that LTP around zero-based budgeting, the affordability assessment. So I think it's still an unresolved action, but it certainly needs to occur.
I'll just note finally, sorry, that there is absolutely every intention that that is happening as part of this next financial year, so that is in time for the LTP. So just to clarify that.
Can we just go back to the topic then? Is everyone comfortable that we remove the schedule and adoption of fees and charges off today's paper? Thank you. Okay, so 9.3. I'm aware that dinner has arrived, but I just want to get 9.3 out of the way, and then we'll adjourn for a meal. So the purpose of this is to the Council's alcohol liquor bylaw is due for review, and the purpose of this report is to propose that the draft bylaw attached be consulted on using the special consultative procedure as prescribed in Section 83 of the Local Government Act. So we have recommendations 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, which achieves that purpose. Councillor Allen?
I'm happy to move them in block.
Thank you. So I have a seconder, Deputy Mayor Mason. Any discussion? Councillor Jennings.
Look, I'm going to support this motion, but I just did, because I want to support it going to consultation. But I did want to flag that, I guess, in a similar vein to the vaping item that was on the agenda, you know, there is this tension between the role that this council wants to play in terms of changing people's behaviour and essentially constraining the rights and freedoms of our citizens. And there's a really careful, you know, balance that needs to be taken. So, I wanted to flag that because I think it's a really important consideration that this table has, that we have to be really clear about what council's role is and function. And obviously we've got legislative functions in terms of alcohol harm minimisation, totally understand that. But at the end of the day, vaping, drinking, gambling, all of those things are legitimate, valid, legal, recreational pursuits. And we've got to bear that in mind, that if the government, if central government wanted to stop all of the harm associated with these things, then they've got to put their big boy pants on and actually lead from a central government's perspective. It's in some aspects, particularly alcohol control and I think in the smoke-free space, it troubles me that central government essentially passes this to local communities as an unfunded mandate and says this is your problem to work through. So I just wanted to flag that. I'm sorry that that's a little bit of a rant, but pleased to support this going up for consultation, but absolutely want to be mindful of people's rights and freedoms.
Look forward to the hearings on that one. Okay, so I'll put the motions, recommendations. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Nice and easy, Brian. Thank you. So our only item now is the in-committee item, but I'm going to adjourn the meeting now so that we can have dinner, so that staff can participate in the meal as well, and we'll come back around 7 o'clock to just finish the in-committee item. Because
it's not me.